It is the 27th of February 2010, 34 minutes past 3 in the morning. Chile is asleep, and it is asleep happy. February is the last full month of summer here. The schools are closed, the coast is full, and the country has spent the evening the way it spends every February evening. In Constitucion, the river carries the smell of pine and paper mill down to the sea. On the sandbar island in the middle of that river, families are camping under canvas. It is the annual thing, the thing everyone does. Guitars, embers, a boy who will not go to sleep. In Dichato, the fishing boats are tied and quiet. The bay is a half circle of dark water. A woman walks a pram along the front because the baby will not settle, and the air is warm, and she is in no hurry. In Talcahuano, the cranes stand over the port like sleeping birds. The night shift is on. A man drinks coffee that has gone cold and thinks about the end of his shift. In Iloca, in Duao, in Lico, the beach houses are full of people from the city. Old men sat by the water at sunset and talked about the fish that used to be here. Their chairs are still out on the sand. The weather is mild. The buses will run in the morning. The bakeries will open at 6. Nothing, anywhere along 1,400 kilometers of coastline is out of place, and the force is already moving. It has already begun. Underneath all of it, the decision has already been made. Millions of people, in this minute, are living the last ordinary moments of their lives. They will never know which minute it was. If you want to be there for the next reconstruction, when the next quiet morning turns, subscribe now and leave a like, and stay with us through what happened here. To understand this night, you have to understand what Chile is standing on. The country lies on a seam. On one side, the floor of the Pacific. On the other, the continent. The ocean floor is sliding underneath South America, slowly, patiently, the way a rug slides under a door until it jams. It does not slide smoothly. It sticks. And while it is stuck, the pressure does not stop. It keeps coming, year after year, generation after generation, and the rock bends and holds and bends and holds. Beneath the coast of Maule, the seam had been stuck for a very long time, since before Chile was Chile. The rock had been storing everything it was given for more than 170 years, which is roughly the span from your great-great-grandfather to you, one long human chain of people who never felt it move. Centuries went into that jam. It came out in 3 minutes. The energy released that night was enormous, and the number will mean nothing to you, so let me put it another way. It was enough electricity to light every home in Chile for years without stopping. All of it spent at once in the dark under the sea with no one watching. And that is only where this story begins, because I am going to give you 3 answers before we are done. Why this catastrophe was so destructive, why thousands of people never received a warning that could have saved them, and what single human decision turned a natural event into a national tragedy. Here is the thesis, and I want you to hold it. This was not only nature. This was also what people chose to do. Chile knew. That is the hard part. Chile had always known. In 1835, the ground here rose out of the sea, and the town of Concepcion was flattened. A young English naturalist called Charles Darwin walked through the ruins and wrote down what he saw. The water came in 3 times. In May of 1960, off Valdivia, the largest earthquake ever recorded on this planet tore open the same coast. More than 1,000 Chileans died, and some counts run to twice that. The wave crossed the entire ocean and killed people in Hawaii, and then killed people in Japan, on the other side of the world, a day later. 1960 is not ancient history. There were people asleep in Dichato that February night whose parents had run up the hill in 1960. After that catastrophe, the country built. It built better. Chilean building codes became some of the strictest anywhere, and they were enforced, and they worked. It built a hydrographic service to watch the sea. It built an emergency office to warn the people. It built a rule, passed from grandmother to grandchild, simple enough for a child to remember. When the ground shakes hard, you climb. And the buildings held. That is the terrible irony. The towers of Santiago swayed and stood. The strength became a story the country told itself. We are the country that survives earthquakes. We are the ones who know how. And underneath that story, a small detail sat quietly, ignored for decades. Scientists had published it plainly in the years before. The The stretch of seam between Constitucion and Concepcion had not broken since Darwin's time. It was loaded. It was overdue. They gave it a name and they wrote it down and they said so out loud. Nobody built an evacuation plan around a paper. That was the detail. That was the bill that came due at 3:30 in the morning. Now come back to the last ordinary night. In Talcahuano, a nurse finishes her rounds and thinks about her feet. In Coliumo, a fisherman checks his lines because he cannot sleep, and he never can before a good catch. In Peluhue, 3 children left their bicycles lying on their sides in the yard, which is the only way children have ever left bicycles. In Constitucion, on the sandbar island, someone is still awake. The tents are dark. The river slides past on both sides, warm and slow and familiar, the way it has slid past every summer of that person's life. In San Juan Bautista, the only village on the island of Juan Fernandez, 600 kilometers out in the open ocean, the fishing families are asleep beside their boats. The lobster traps are stacked. It is the softest, safest place in the country. A woman in Dichato is still walking with the pram. She has stopped to look at the bay because it is beautiful and because it costs nothing to look. Nobody was watching the water. Nobody was checking the evacuation routes. Nobody was thinking about danger. Nobody was watching the water because the water had been the same water for 50 years. Nobody was checking the evacuation routes because the routes were a thing from school. Nobody was thinking about danger because it was February and it was warm and the country was on holiday. That is exactly why nobody was ready for what was going to happen in 11 minutes, 3:34 in the morning. The first thing is not a noise. It is a wrongness in the floor, low down, like a truck passing that never passes. Then the house begins to talk. The glass talks first, then the doors, then the roof beams, and then everything at once, and the sound is not a bang. It is a long, grinding growl that comes up through your feet. It does not stop. That is what everyone remembers. It does not stop. 10 seconds, 20. In an ordinary earthquake, you are already standing up again. 40 seconds, a minute. It is still going. You cannot stand. Not because you are frightened, though you are, because the floor is moving sideways under you faster than your ankles can answer, and you go down like a man on a boat deck, and you crawl. 3 minutes. That is how long the ground shook. 3 minutes is long enough to boil a kettle and pour it. Imagine holding onto the leg of a table for exactly that long, in the dark, with the power gone. The strength of it was magnitude 8.8. Numbers like that do not fit in a hand, so here's the shape of it instead. It was one of the 4 or 5 most violent earthquakes ever measured by human instruments. Only a handful in all of recorded history were larger. The city of Concepcion moved, not shook, moved. It ended the night about 3 meters west of where it began, roughly the length of a small car, and it never went back. And the planet itself was altered. The mass of the Earth shifted very slightly, and the day it turns in became a fraction shorter. Not enough for you to feel, enough for us to measure. The world spins a little faster now because of what happened that night, and then it got worse. Out at sea, above the seam, a piece of ocean floor the size of a province had just been thrown upward. Everything above it went up with it. Millions of tons of water, lifted and now falling back and now spreading. Here is what people do not understand about a tsunami. In deep water, it is nothing. A ship above it feels a swell it would not remark on. If you were out there in a boat, at that moment, you would have felt the sea breathe and gone back to sleep. It is not tall, it is long, it is not a wave. It is the whole depth of the ocean, from the floor to the sky, moving in one direction, and it moves at the speed of an airliner, around 700 kilometers an hour. A plane leaving Santiago for the coast, at cruising speed, would not beat it. So now the clock is running. Out there, in the dark, the sea is crossing the distance, and on the shore, a woman is picking her baby up out of the wreckage of her own kitchen, and she has no idea, and no one has told her, and there are minutes left. The system worked. Understand that clearly. The country's hydrographic service saw it. Within minutes, a tsunami warning went out, and then the number came back wrong. A sea level reading was misread. A single instrument misunderstood, and the estimate collapsed from catastrophe to almost nothing. The warning was withdrawn. The National Emergency Office passed the word onward, and the word was that there was no danger of a tsunami, and it went out on the radio, and it went to the coast, and the president of the country said it publicly. Say it plainly, because it is the heart of this story. The alarm was canceled while the wave was still coming, and the sea, which does not listen to anybody, gave its own warning first. Along the coast, in Dichato, in Talcahuano, in the coves of Maule, the water walked backwards. It pulled out and out, further than the lowest tide anyone had ever seen, and it left the bay floor naked. Rocks nobody knew were there, anchors, old chains, fish flapping in shallow pools of moonlight. People came down to look. Of course they did. The power was out. They were shaken and awake and standing in the street. And here was this astonishing thing. They walked out onto the wet ground. They held up their phones. Somebody laughed. Nobody understood what they were being shown. The sea was not retreating. The sea was drawing breath. 600 kilometers from the mainland, on the island of Juan Fernandez, no warning of any kind arrived. Not a canceled one. Not a wrong one. Nothing at all. There was a girl there named Martina Maturana. She was 12 years old. She had felt the shaking, and she went outside, and she looked at the water. And she saw the boats in the little harbor doing something boats do not do, moving wrongly, turning where they should not turn. She did not wait for an adult to agree with her. She ran to the square, and she got to the bell, and she rang it. She rang it, and she kept ringing it, and she shouted at people to go up. The village went up the hill, because a 12-year-old rang a bell. Most of San Juan Bautista is alive today because of that. That is what a warning is worth when it arrives in time. On the mainland, for almost everyone, there was no bell and no time and no one to ring it. Now, forget every film you have ever seen. It is not a blue wall. It is not a curling wave with a white top. That is not what comes. It comes as a black thing. It is the color of mud and diesel and everything it has already destroyed. It is not water anymore. It comes flat. It comes fast. It comes like the tide coming in 1,000 times too quickly. And then it keeps coming, and it does not stop, because behind it is the ocean. The sound is wrong. It is not a crash. It is a grinding, a scraping, the sound of houses being taken apart against each other, and under it a low roar with no end. There is no light. The power is gone. People hear their town being eaten, and they cannot see it. Dichato is taken, the whole front of it, gone in minutes. Iloca, gone. Duao, gone. Lico, gone. In Constitucion, the river becomes the enemy. The water goes up the river mouth, and it takes the sandbar island in the middle, the island with the tents, the island where the families were camping because it was summer, and because they always did. In Talcahuano, the sea walks into the city, and when it goes back out, it leaves fishing boats sitting in the streets. Steel hulls, dozens of meters long, resting against houses, kilometers from the water, as though a child had put them there. When the sun came up, the country saw itself from the air. Roofs in trees, a port with ships on the roads. Whole neighborhoods reduced to a grid of foundations, like a plan of a town somebody forgot to build. There were people who stayed at their posts that night, and some of them did not come back. Radio operators who kept talking into microphones with the sea already in the street. Fishermen who went down to the coves to shout at other men's houses. Volunteers who ran towards the water because that is what they were for. I will not give you a name here, and I want you to know why. The press recorded the fact and not the man. Chile lost people who died warning other people, and some of those names were never written down. He went towards the water so that somebody else would not have to. And now, the thing that changes everything. There was time. Between the shaking and the wave, there were minutes, and in some places, tens of minutes. That is not nothing. That is enough to get up a hill. The system saw it. The instruments worked. The warning was issued. And then it was canceled, on the strength of one misread number, and a message went out to a coastline full of frightened people, and the message said there was no danger. And people who had already climbed the hill came back down. Understand what that means. Understand it fully. They did the right thing. They followed the old rule. They went up, and then the state told them it was safe, and they believed the state, because why would you not? And they walked back down to their houses. Thousands of people made the most important decision of their lives using information that was false. The cost. Around 525 people died. Of those, roughly 150 or more were killed by the water, not the earthquake, which means they were killed after the ground had stopped moving, in the window when a correct warning would still have saved them. Around 2 million people were affected, which is more than 1 Chilean in 10. Something in the order of 370,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, which is the housing of a city larger than most in the country, erased in a night. The damage ran to tens of billions of dollars, a sum close to a fifth of everything the country produced in a year. Chile spent a fifth of its year in 3 minutes and 11 minutes more. And all of it sat on top of warnings that already existed. The scientific papers naming that exact stretch of coast is overdue. The reports on the sea level instruments that were not maintained. The memory of 1960, held by old people whose grandchildren no longer listened. And the oldest warning of all, the one that cost nothing. The one every child on that coast had been taught. When the ground shakes hard and long, you go up, and you do not come down for anybody. They came down because they were told to. Chile changed afterwards. It built a new national tsunami warning system with the authority to sound the alarm without waiting. It built sirens on the coast and marked evacuation routes on the walls of every seaside town, and it drills now, with the whole population, in the street, on ordinary afternoons. Officials were investigated. The canceled warning became a case and a scandal, and finally a lesson written into law. The rule now is the old rule, made official. If it shakes, you go up. Nobody has to tell you. Nobody gets to tell you not to. It is a good system. It is one of the best in the world. The families on the sandbar island will never see it. The woman with the pram in Dichato will never see it. The old men, whose chairs were still out on the sand, will never see it. They were told they were safe. That was all. That was the whole of it. If there is a catastrophe you want reconstructed next, tell me in the comments and tell me why it matters to you. I read them, and I choose the next one from what you write.